gentlemen, judges in opposition, welcome. And today we would like to introduce a pressing topic that's been of interest to many New York City citizens, congestion pricing. Congestion pricing is a plan to reduce traffic by charging drivers a fee to enter key locations with busy roads. If successful, it would encourage people to use public transportation or other sources to get to their destination and reduce the number of vehicles on roadways. There are certainly benefits to this policy, as currently traffic hinders people's ability to arrive at their intended destination. This especially impacts millions of students and workers who, on their way to schools or workplaces, could get halted in their way of traffic and not arrive on school or their workplaces on time, and which can affect their grades or professionalism. With congestion pricing, these issues will greatly decrease to the point that there will be increased productivity and less time wasted. Another issue congestion pricing addresses is the improvement to public transportation services. The MTA plans to use the congestion pricing fees to improve the transportation services they offer, which include their buses, trains, and their subways. They would especially use it to improve the subway, which is a century-year-old system which rapidly needs upgrades to prevent any decline in their services. Most MTA subway cars are in fact at least a decade old, with on average a subway car being 19 years old. This is an issue not only to the convenience of New York City residents, but also the safety of the fellow New York City citizens. The proceeds from congestion pricing will mainly go to improving the MTA services and not going to pay off the MTA debt. With modernized and cheaper public transportation, residents will more likely use the MTA as their mode of travel, causing decreases in CO2 emissions and reducing the pollution of the severely overconcentrated city. New York City currently produces 52 million metric tons of CO2 emissions every year, and 30% alone of those 52 million metric tons comes from transportation. A million metric tons is about hundreds of thousands of homes, vehicles, and several airline emissions. Now imagine that 15 million metric tons coming from just the daily use of cars, trucks, and any other vehicle used around New York City. Congestion pricing could greatly reduce the amount of carbon dioxide emissions, making the rather polluted New York City a cleaner place. Although congestion pricing has many benefits, there are concerns that it will not be successful. New York City is not the first place congestion pricing will have been implemented, as other countries have employed similar programs for their issues with traffic as well. One example is London, which had traffic reduced by 18 to 30% in the first year of congestion pricing being started. However, in 20 years, London traffic went back to the way it was before. The price had tripled, but congestion pricing had not solved the core issue that traffic impacts the daily lives of their citizens. We agree that there is a problem that congestion pricing cannot fix, which is that traffic could inevitably go back to the way it was before. However, we know that congestion pricing is only meant to alleviate the symptoms, and that New York City is so full of traffic that people's general quality of life is decreasing because of traffic. Even with temporary results, citizens will still be satisfied for a few years until we find a better plan for the root cause, which is that New York City is overpopulated with not only people, also vehicles. For now, congestion pricing is the best bet to improve the current situation and may even solve it completely. Other countries have been very successful once they started to charge fees for entering locations overflowing with cars. Such countries are Singapore and Stockholm, Sweden, which have improved greatly upon instigating congestion pricing. We can learn from such cities that started a congestion pricing program of their own and follow their example while learning from their mistakes to create a better plan for the future. As the population of our city grows, so does the usage of vehicles in our most industrious areas. This inevitably leads to traffic, pollution, and an overall decrease in the people's quality of life. Overcrowded lanes and poor public transportation services have caused many citizens to suffer for years. It's time to take action, and congestion pricing can be what makes the city better for all citizens. Thank you.
More traffic into less portioned neighborhoods would also increase the pollution in those areas.
We believe that congestion pricing, although the traffic might be funneled to other areas, it will overall decrease pollution and traffic in general.
But because you're diverting all the congestion from those areas into the other areas, don't you think that more cars, more pollution in those less impoverished areas?
As an alternative solution, people can use public transportation instead of vehicles.
So basically what you're agreeing with me that the more cars there are, the more emissions there are, and that means the more pollution there is in those areas.
But there won't be more cars.
So you're telling me that everyone will just drop cars and just take public transportation?
Well, not everyone, but
Exactly, so the congestion will move and divert into other areas, correct?
correct.
So, and logically, don't you believe that with the increased pollution, the neighborhood's quality of life would
But
also
there won't be
increase?
increased pollution if you're using the same amount of cars.
But there are more cars going into other areas because there's more congestion in those areas.
But generally, pollution will stay the same.
But there are more cars, the more pollution, the more emissions.
Correct.
So are you aware that of the Equal Protection Clause?
No.
The Equal Protection Clause voices that no state shall unfairly discriminate against any person or group of people. So don't you think with the traffic congestion these citizens have to deal with, as well as the pollution decreasing their quality of life, that these citizens residing in the southern Bronx and Harlem areas are being unethically and unfairly treated?
Sorry, can you clarify that?
So basically, with all such the burden that the burden on the quality of life from these citizens in the Bronx, don't you think that they're being discriminated against, unfairly treated? They have to take the burden for the government to get some funding?
We think that although congestion pricing does have some short-term disadvantages to these low-income areas, we believe that long-term that this will help decrease pollution and traffic. And for low-income people, they, instead of trying to bypass the routes, they could instead choose to apply for reduced fares. So in general, then they would be paying less than those people who come from high-income backgrounds.
So with London that already initiated congestion pricing, it's very misconceived that their congestion pricing is working because according to New York City Council, London is more congested than ever, even worse than New York per INRIX. The policy is so unpopular that 66% of residents voted against it. And also, the pollution has not gotten better as well. In the past year, London has 3,600 deaths, while New York only has 2,400 deaths.
This could be due to external factors, and London is only one of the model cities that use congestion pricing. There's London, Singapore, Milan.
Perfect, yeah. So Singapore also takes into account a labor-intensive and error-prone fee collection system. So as it grows, Singapore has had trouble enforcing the restricted zone area.
I think that what all these cities have in common is that these are bustling metropolitan areas. However, because congestion pricing plan is not a perfect plan, but we still believe that it's the best policy for New York City.
Before I begin, I'd like to thank the media outlets, Nipsey Huey, and Justice Dorothy Chin-Brandt for making it here today. Also, thank you to Ron, who allowed us all to be part of his summer associate team this summer. It's been a pleasure working in this office the past few weeks, and above all, thank you to Tony, Ron's Chief of Staff, for your continued support in our endeavors this summer. With that, I'm going to go over the negative constructive case. Ladies and gentlemen, the affirmative suggests that congestion pricing is a fair and effective means of reducing traffic in our city. However, this policy, while appearing to be pragmatic, imposes burdens on those who can least afford it. Today, I stand in firm opposition to congestion pricing because it exacerbates economic inequality, overlooks more equitable solutions, and restricts freedom of movement for everyday citizens. My first contention is that congestion pricing unfairly penalizes those already struggling financially. For the average commuter, especially those who must drive due to inadequate public transportation options, this policy adds an additional financial burden. This is on top of existing costs such as bridge and tunnel tolls, and with rideshare companies like Uber and Lyft likely to exploit peak hours with surge pricing. Everyday travel could become extremely expensive. In fact, Uber has publicly shown their full support for congestion pricing. Josh Gold, a spokesman for Uber, said that the company supports the tolls because funding a robust public transit system reduces the need for car ownership, which is likely to lead to more Uber use. The fact that Uber is banned in London, a city that has long implemented congestion pricing, reveals a critical inconsistency. London authorities recognized that Uber's practices were not in the public's best interest, citing concerns of safety, regulation, and the company's impact on the local economy. If Uber's business model was genuinely aligned with the public good, as their support for congestion pricing might suggest, why was the company banned in one of the very cities where such pricing is in place? This contradiction exposes Uber's support for congestion pricing is more about profit than public welfare. The result? A system where only the affluent can afford to bypass congestion, leaving lower income individuals to bear the brunt of both financial and time costs. Although you can apply for low income tax credit, this only applies if you live in the congestion zone and make under $60,000. Therefore, commuters living in the outer boroughs or traveling in from out of state will be greatly affected by this toll, with limited to no option to alleviate this added financial burden. 17% of those who work in Manhattan come from Queens, and 16% come from Brooklyn. This totals 1/3 of the commuters in this city. Let's come up with a possible but likely scenario. Let's say John lives in Oakland Gardens in Eastern Queens, where there's no accessible public transportation nearby. So he decides to hop on the I-495 and through the Queens Midtown Tunnel. That's $6.94 in tolls one way and $13.88 round trip. Right out of the tunnel, John's already on 36th Street, well into the congestion zone, so that's another $15 added. Parking in Manhattan averages $19 a day, making the total expenditures for the day $47.88 just for transportation. Of course, he could just take the Q27 to the 7 train to get to work instead. But he has to be in the office by 9, and it's an hour on the 27 to Flushing, and another 15 minutes on the 7 train. And let's give John 10 minutes to walk from the station to his office. That's 2 hours of commute via public transportation, while driving is only 36 minutes. Not to mention, MTA data shows that weekday subway delays in New York City increased by 30% from January to April 2024 compared to the same period last year. There are many like John throughout the city who have limited options near them and have to sacrifice cost in order to save time and trouble. Tacking on additional costs because the city isn't accessible enough for many of the suburban neighborhoods is far from fair on the citizens. My second contention is that rather than alleviating congestion, this policy may seem to shift the problem to surrounding areas. For example, with toll-free routes such as FDR Drive, drivers looking to avoid congestion pricing will likely divert to neighborhoods such as Harlem and the South Bronx. These areas, often home to disadvantaged and minority communities, will experience heightened traffic, increased pollution, and reduced quality of life. All outcomes that contradict the goals of congestion pricing. As Adam Smith said in The Wealth of Nations, no society can surely be flourishing and happy, of which the greater part of the members are poor and miserable. Implementing congestion pricing would only deepen the divide between the rich and the poor, making it harder for society as a whole to thrive. In addition to the impact on residents, small businesses, especially those within the congestion zone, will suffer as potential customers are deterred by the added cost of driving into the city. New York City currently has over 183,000 small businesses, most of them centered around Midtown and Lower Manhattan. The reduction in foot traffic directly impacts local economies, which are already fragile due to rising inflation and hits taken from the COVID-19 pandemic. Moreover, the trucking industry, a backbone of small business supply chains, will be hit very hard by increased fees, leading to higher prices on consumer goods. After all, an additional $36 per truck per trip severely limits options for drivers and suppliers. My fourth contention is that proponents argue that congestion pricing will fund public transportation improvements, but the reality is much more complex. Public transportation systems will face even greater pressure as more people abandon their cars to avoid the tolls. The surge in demand could lead to overcrowding, delays, and further price hikes for commuters. The MTA is also currently facing significant legal challenges, particularly from New Jersey, which has filed a lawsuit claiming that the US Constitution does not permit states to enact laws that place undue burdens on interstate commerce. New Jersey's lawsuit argues that congestion pricing, as proposed by the MTA, unfairly penalizes commuters who travel between states, potentially violating the commerce clause. This is not an isolated case. In fact, a total of 7 lawsuits have been filed against the program, each raising concerns about the legality and fairness of imposing such fees. These legal battles highlight the potential constitutional issues that could arise if it is implemented. While congestion pricing is intended to address a significant issue, it introduces new problems that disproportionately impact the most vulnerable. From economic inequality and small business struggles to increased pollution in disadvantaged neighborhoods, this policy does more harm than good. I urge you to reject this resolution and advocate for more equitable and effective solutions to our city's transportation challenges. Thank you.
burden low-income individuals. However, do you believe that they would suffer less from traffic congestion and pollution that already exists?
I mean, there are several things that we can talk about here. We can talk about small businesses, small low-income people that go into cities. I mean, we're talking about a lot of businesses. We're talking about businesses of people, or people even living inside the congestion zones that are low income. So when we talk—
Alright, so when you mention small businesses that are harmed, is that an assumption you have, or are there statistics to back it up?
100% there are statistics. Most reasonably, we can understand that there are over 46% of New York art, theater, and cultural institutions are located in the congestion-priced zones. And we're not talking about just, we're not talking besides that, food carts. We're talking about people who own food carts, who own small businesses, who own stores that have to make a living, that have to provide for their family. We're talking about those people are being denied or being limited to the amount of customers that they receive in these congestion pricing zones.
So are you saying the only factor would be the congestion zones and not the poor management or the bad marketing?
What do you mean by poor management and bad marketing? What is the marketing aspect of congestion pricing?
Marketing does not contribute to congestion pricing. However, you're claiming that because of congestion pricing, the businesses would be less likely to be successful. However, is that just because of congestion pricing? Or could that be because they have poor management or bad marketing?
I mean, are we talking about, do you know the specific amount of people, of how many people go in the city, and now we're being limited because of congestion pricing? I mean, let alone the fact that we have people that are being charged to even go in the city. We're talking about people with income under 60K. Kamala and Joe Biden actually proposed that anybody under 200K would be charged no income tax, meaning that there's a large amount of increment between 60K and 200K. We're talking about 140K amount of income of low-income people who still need that service or still need that money to survive.
All right, and are you aware that they would be able to get deductions from their congestion pricing because of their income?
Yeah, and again, I'll mention again, Kamala and Biden both wanted no income tax, raise income tax under 200K. And we're talking about 60K, 140K increment. We're talking about families, minorities, people who are making maybe 70K. They can't get the tax credit. They can't get that refund. So what are we going to do about them? Are we going to forget them? I think our city is one of the best in the country. We represent every single person. We take care of every single person in our city, every minority, every citizen. And you're basically denying the right, or you're basically denying them a chance to burn.
All right. And okay, you mentioned that Uber was banned in London, but are you aware that it was unbanned in 2022?
I mean, we're talking about Uber. Do you know how, thinking of how big the company Uber is,
Yes.
right? They have a lot of money. And we're not talking just about Uber's effect on the country, but we're talking about small businesses. What about people who own taxi companies, limo companies? Uber can afford to alleviate these congestion prices.
And do you know how many jobs Uber provides for low-income families?
Okay, but again, I'll say again, you're talking about people who own other small businesses. You're forgetting the idea that there's still, even if it's a small percentage, of citizens that we need to take care of. We're talking about, Sure, I'd like to finish my point. So we're talking about people who own businesses, limo businesses, taxi businesses. We're talking about people outside the Uber business that can't alleviate the congestion because they have to surcharge the certain person for that service. But Uber, on the other hand, they can alleviate that. They have enough money to charge less. So you're forcing out these people out of these businesses. You're forcing out these certain people to not be able to now afford to be able to run their business. You're taking away opportunities here, and that's not what this is about. We're here to give opportunities. Thank you.
Low and middle income families mainly rely on public transportation, and that they can't afford the vehicles that higher or upper middle class use. According to Community Service Society studies, it states that 128,000 of outer borough residents drive into Manhattan for work. And of that 128,000, only 5,000 people of poor outer borough residents commute to Manhattan by vehicle. According to NBA themselves, 3.6 million residents rely on subways and 1.1 million rely on buses to travel. Congestion pricing enables more funds for the 3.6 million residents relying on subways, buses, or trains. So by implementing congestion pricing, it will enable a better environment and transportation for those people who need that. And for the 5,000 low-income people who rely on vehicles, they can apply for reduced fares for congestion charges. Additionally, our opponent have mentioned about Uber in London. It stated that Uber was banned due to congestion pricing. However, that's not the case.
Rather, it was banned because the license to operate private hire vehicles in London was denied due to safety concerns of passengers. Moreover, the judge upheld Uber's appeal against the decision made in London in November of 2019. Our opponent had mentioned about transit desert, where it is difficult for people who live in public in areas that public transportation is not readily available will have no option but to pay congestion charges. However, the revenue gained from congestion charges will partially go into installing more stops, bus lanes, and faster bus services so that it will reach areas that are in transit deserts. Although at the moment public transportation is not a viable option for them, they can also apply for reduced fares. Regarding the limited option of reduced fares, such saying that only after 10 trips will families of low income can receive reduced fares. Congestion pricing is a work in progress. We can find alternative solutions such as reduced fares in general for low income families. Moreover, our opponent brought up the mention of small businesses and how small businesses are negatively impacted by congestion pricing. However, by discouraging car usage, it can help overall transportation costs for individuals. Rather than spending money on parking, gas, and vehicle maintenance, individuals are left with additional money to spend at local business. Less congestion also provides favorable access to smaller businesses, as by improving public spaces, people may feel more inclined to spend more time in the area. This increases dwell time can also lead to an increase on spending on local businesses. Moreover, because of the congestion charge placed on vehicles entering and exiting Manhattan, it will actually result in an increase of foot traffic in surrounding areas. Increase of foot traffic results in increase for business for local shops, as more people are going to choose an alternative method when traveling to Manhattan. Rather than using vehicles, people can use buses or walk to their desired destination. Hence, local businesses are not losing traction, but rather receive the attraction from a different form, which can equally help local businesses garner attraction. And our opponent also mentioned congestion charges can also lead to redirection of congestion to other areas, such as FDR Drive. But we can propose a possible solution. Implementing congestion charges on major bypass routes such as FDR Drive and Bowery Park Underpass during peak hours will also discourage drivers to evade congestion charges.